Okay.
of the year 2014 here in Vancouver, and we are going to have an incredibly turbulent, tumultuous year for the human species, for the United States, and for the world. The most important thing I can say to you right now is that we are on the eve of World War. And that World War, should it occur, is going to be nuclear. And should that nuclear war occur, the most likely outcome is the elimination of the human species from this, from planet Earth. There are articles in Europe comparing the current situation to World War I. World War I got underway. The drift towards World War I got underway in 1890 when Bismarck was fired by the grandson of Queen Victoria, the Kaiser. And a war eventually broke out between one grandson of Queen Victoria, the Tsar, and the other grandson of Queen Victoria, the Kaiser. So, and we've been in war ever since. World War I, World War II, the Cold War, and this war of terrorism, and it's been ongoing ever since. And we've come to a point where we're looking at any moment, the United States, under Obama, launching a nuclear assault on Russia and China at any point. And this situation requires that Obama be removed from office, either through impeachment, either through the invocation of the 25th Amendment, or through resignation based on scandal or whatever. That's how serious the situation is. Obama has to be removed. Above all else, Obama has to be removed. It is estimated that 60% of the U.S. population would like to see him go. And now this has to be done. And that's the message that the movement of Lyndon LaRouche and those associated with Lyndon LaRouche, both in North America and internationally, are now communicating to all of the forces of the world. Obama has to be removed as soon now. You can't let it wait. You can't let it fester, because you are headed towards a world war, a nuclear world war. Now, so let me go into that aspect of it. Why are we headed to a nuclear world war? I went through this in detail in the last meeting. Essentially, you have the revival of a commitment to progress and development in Asia, including Russia and now Ukraine. This is a revival of something called the American system. This is not communism, this is not capitalism, this is national economy, and a concert of nations who are coming into a full intention for development as the only way that they can go. You have, on the other hand, the Anglo-Dutch imperial system, which is not just about being in control. It's actually about population extermination. It's about wars, and it's about wiping out most of the human species. And the less direct means to do this are not there at this point. And nuclear war is their last potential to do this. Now, this is a very hard thing for people to even grasp, that we have an oligarchy running an empire which has had this intention of killing off most of the world's population. This is, you can imagine some deranged creature, going out and shooting, some deranged person going out and shooting 20 people in a mall. But can you imagine that the elite of the world want to eliminate most of the people, the vast majority of the people on the planet? This is the hardest thing for people to understand. They cannot get that. That is hard for them to conceive, that is indeed the intention. Okay? That is the hardest thing. And so this brings in the issue that LaRouche has raised in the last few days. We call it the issue of Zeus versus Prometheus. And that's the issue we're looking at now for humanity as a whole, and also in all of the political situations. And that's also the issue of the American Revolution and the American system, and the directionality that Asia is now following in the copying of the earlier American approach to economic development. That is the quintessential expression of a Promethean policy. And I'll go into that a little bit in a second. But the rebirth of the American system in Asia, after being virtually wiped out after the assassination of Kennedy, is largely due to the remnant influence of the earlier Chinese and modernization movement around Sun Yat-sen, and the intersection of that, which was the American system. He was the American system, Sun Yat-sen, the founder of modern China, and its intersection with what the LaRouche movement has done, and also the intersection of what the LaRouche movement has done with respect to Russia, and the problem that they have, and what the problem that Russia has had, is that they got rid of the Tsarist system, but they still couldn't develop the peasants that they inherited from the Tsarist system. And so the Russians are now looking at their own version of the American system. Not communism, not socialism, and not financial imperial capitalism. They're looking at their own version of the American system. So now I want to go into the question of Prometheus. How many people know the story of Prometheus? Okay. Unfortunately, the three plays that were done by Aeschylus, I think only one survives, Prometheus Unbound. But we know about Prometheus. And Prometheus gave human beings fire. Now, many people say that fire, the ability to cook food and begin controlling nature through fire, is perhaps the most major development that brought the human species further into power over nature. And the issue of fire and more powerful forms of fire is the issue of energy flux density, is the issue of the development of our increasing human powers over nature. The Chinese, who have placed the rover on the moon, have indicated that their intention is to bring back, later on in the decade, helium-3, abundant amounts relative of helium-3, which means that they have a commitment to fusion power. And the commitment to fusion power is a Promethean idea of being able to replicate the power of the sun in a small area to create enormous power, such enormous power that in a small area, such that you have the power to send rockets. You have the power to stop asteroids. You have the power to protect the Earth. You are essentially taking man into the domain of controlling nature for man's benefit, and of protecting man. This is very important. Of protecting man from nature, which does not recognize man as anything different. An asteroid doesn't know that it's going to wipe out the human species, and thereby stops itself from doing so. So nature is not our friend in that sense. We can, however, transform nature. We can make asteroids friendly sources of necessary minerals that we need to develop in space, right? We can do that, and that's the Promethean identity. That's the Promethean identity, and that is coming back. Now, now the Zeus idea is different. Zeus is the god of the gods, and the gods of the gods, and the gods are the oligarchy. So he's the lead god of the oligarchy of gods, and they're really human beings, from what I can tell. But they were formed in this Greek mythology as gods. But what made them gods was they controlled everything. Who are you? You're not a god. You're not one of the oligarchy. Who are you? Oh, you're somebody that we can have fun with. We can kill. You know, we can do whatever we want with you, right? And you know, we can even bring you in a little bit into the oligarchy if you're good. You know, if you're good. So essentially, Zeus is totally arbitrary. You know, and the gods are all fighting among each other. Sure, the oligarchy all fights among each other. And Zeus, in the Promethean plays of Aeschylus, Zeus imprisons Prometheus because Prometheus gave man fire. All right, but Prometheus knows that Zeus and the oligarchy will be wiped out by their own nature. Now, today we have an empire that has the essential features of a Zeus-like system, where everybody has to be subservient and not creative. If you're creative, you're threatening the order, the system. You're threatening the system. And the different forms of this Zeus system take different forms. One of the more obvious forms is the Greens. You know? No. human beings are threatening nature. Human beings are causing a disturbance in the order of nature. Human beings must submit to a fixed system of smallness, of peasanthood, of they cannot aspire to transform the universe with their creative powers. That is evil. That is evil. That's you are a destroyer. You are whatever. And of course, whatever form it takes, the propaganda takes, you're going to cause destruction. You're going to cause global warming. You're going to cause this, whatever form it takes. The point is that mankind and its creative potentials are the greatest threat to whom? To nature. And whose nature? Zeus. The nature of the oligarch. So that's one example of the Zeus perspective. And people who accept the Zeus orientation, they essentially become very small. They become very, or they become very violent hatred of anybody that's creative or what have you. Anybody that actually has a solution to problems or is calling for big projects or anything like that. So now the second kind of Zeus viewpoint is contained in various forms of deviant forms of religion. And like they have it in Islam, they have it in Catholicism, they have it in Protestantism. They have the various different kinds of anti-Promethean viewpoint in religion. In the Catholic Church, it takes the form of Aristotle, and it takes the form of the idea that you can't know what's truthful. You have to submit to God. You cannot know. You have to submit to God. And if you think you know, and you think you can change the world for the better, that is a form of arrogance, a form of hubris against the gods. So that's an example. And in Islam, there was a period in Islam when they had a Baghdad Caliphate in about 800 to 900, time of Charlemagne, where they were actually committed to scientific technological progress. And then along came this guy Al-Ghazali, who said, no, this is a heresy, this is a violation of Allah, and he brought destruction. He called it the destruction. What was he destroying? The evil heresy of man's arrogant belief in his own power. And that destruction wiped out. It all occurred about the same time as the Mongols, so the Mongols sort of helped out. And that destruction wiped out everybody. Then later, another guy came along and said, no, that destruction was not enough. We need a destruction of the destruction. And that guy's name was LaRouche, and those were the invaders from Morocco who destroyed the progressive caliphate in Spain. El Cid was the Christian leader of the Muslim troops who defended them from that. So essentially, so that's another form of it. That's another form of it. A third form of this Zeus thing comes from Adam Smith and the British East India Company. Man cannot know enough to plan and determine the future, but man has instincts, and left to themselves, those instincts will create a greatest good. Therefore, you must leave you must surrender to the invisible God of supply and demand, the invisible God of the invisible hand, the invisible God of this. And we might be hearing some, I think we're going to be hearing about the modern version of this in the Austrian school tonight. So, now, I haven't studied China enough, but I know that there were tendencies in China centered in part around Taoism, which were of this type, of wiping out, and there was a similar quality in Mao. There was a similar quality in Mao Zedong, but I can't talk about that because, you know, I don't know enough. And then there's the general Zeus-like quality that we are all biologically determined. We have no will. We are a sum of biological interactions. We are controlled by our biology, and that is that we cannot know how to change the world. We don't, but so forth. So anyhow, so now, but America as a nation in its earlier years, at various times, completely identified with this idea of Prometheus. And the vast majority of the immigrants who came to America from Europe and later from other places did so to yearn for that freedom, not the greed factor, although that's, some people say that's a factor, but for the right to develop. Okay. And this idea of Prometheus was well known in the 1700s. And Benjamin Franklin was celebrated in Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, where the chorale sings the Ode to Joy in the last movement of the Ninth Symphony, which was written by Schiller, an ode to mankind. And Beethoven dedicates the Ode to Joy to the leading Prometheus that he knew about, who was Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin was seen as a Promethean figure who was promoting everywhere in the world this idea that human beings can, through science, develop power, develop the steam engine, develop technology, develop canals, develop electricity, learn about electricity. He was promoting this viewpoint. He wasn't just a scientist who was doing experiments. He was promoting classical music. He created a classical music instrument that you can't hear in a large crowd. It's the water harmonica. Benjamin Franklin had this idea of promoting this all over the world. And wherever he went, he recruited from the upper crust of Europe and from the scientific potential of Europe. He recruited a whole layer of people to this viewpoint. So we are now at the point where the issue of Zeus versus Prometheus is now coming to what you might say a final conclusion. Either the human race is wiped out by the oligarchy, or the oligarchy is finally defeated by a humanity which is committed to progress. And now, what we're talking about now is the immediate move to remove Obama from office. And what LaRouche is saying to the forces, he said this last night in his webcast. He's saying this to the forces in the United States, the forces in Russia, the forces internationally. He's saying it to the political class. He's saying it to everybody in his own authority. And he's saying this has to be done now. Okay? It's not, and that's the message that we are now getting out throughout all the various layers that we have in contact with. He has to go now. And everybody has to pull whatever lever or whatever they can to see that he gets out. Okay, and that's what we're doing. And once Obama's out, then the pieces will start to fall into place, because you essentially remove the oligarchical control over the United States, because the institutional layers have moved away from the imperial policy. And removing Obama then creates the opportunity for them to capture the vice president and direct the United States out of the imminent possibility of nuclear war, which has to be done. And then Glass-Steagall and all the other things can follow. And the destruction of Wall Street can follow. So we have 60% now of the U.S. population would like to see Obama removed. Okay, would like to see Obama removed. Are they all coming in?
They'll leave it behind.
Huh?
In a few minutes.
Okay, they're all coming in. Okay, and they would like to see Obama removed. And so you have all these things taking shape. You have the NSA business and increasing support for Snowden, even in the New York Times now. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of stuff coming out on 9/11 now, and the 28 pages, and the court rulings, and this issue of 9/11 is very important. The 28 pages is very important. The fact that the United States, under Bush and under Obama, have accepted protecting the authors of 9/11. This is huge, and this is one flank. But the population, although they would like to see Obama removed, it is probably certain that the overwhelming majority of the population wanted to see Hitler removed too. But they're fearful. And this is the problem. They're fearful. They're saying, well, I'm gonna look after number one. I'm just gonna stick my, I don't wanna get into trouble. And this is what we're going after. This is what this whole Snowden thing is going after. This is what a lot of other things are going after. This whole, I'm a little person. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want my name on a list. I don't want, etc. Now, there's a number of congressmen in the United States who are now absolutely livid that the Obama administration and European media have expressed a certain kind of gloating about the terror bombings that occurred in Volgograd and so forth. So there's a certain, and one congressman in particular saying that the Russians have been cooperating with us. We have not been cooperating with the Russians. The Russians gave us advanced information on the terror bombing in in Boston, these Chechen brothers. And these Chechen brothers were related to a Chechen leader who is the father-in-law of a former leading State Department official who was organizing the Chechen insurrection back in the late 90s. And this guy is married to the uncle of the two terror bombers. And he's an American, leading member of the State Department, who was promoting the idea of using Islamic terrorism against Russia and China as a policy. So the Russians know all of this. The Chinese know all of this. And what do you have in China? You have the Uyghurs from western Xinjiang province, try to do a terrorist attack in Red Square. And And what are they? They're Muslim fundamentalists. They're Urumqi. There's Uyghur fighting in Syria. There's Chechens fighting in Syria. And then they go back to their country and they launch terror wave. This is going on. And this is being protected and promoted. And the Russians are reaching a certain point. They've had it up to here. And they're starting to go after it, heavy duty. They're going to start naming names. They're going to start naming the Saudis. They're going after the Saudis. Okay, but this could lead to nuclear war. Because the potential terrorists, you haven't seen the potential that they've built up to be able to do this. The same thing is in Mumbai, where you had the hotel. The terror in the hotel. It's the same thing. The same crowd. And this thing is going to escalate. And how we deal with that in the U.S. is very important. How we blow it back to get Obama out is very important. So, now the International Monetary Fund has a report saying that the level of indebtedness of the so-called advanced countries is the greatest in 200 years, and that it is imperative that there be massive write-down of the debts of the advanced sector countries. Now, a massive write-down of these debts would trigger a collapse of the financial bubble of derivatives and so forth. But the fact that the IMF is warning this, is saying this, also is an important aspect of the situation, which is that we are facing the financial aspect of it as well, which also feeds into a nuclear war situation. So the removal of Obama at this point is the number one thing, and the LaRouche movement as of last night has put it on the agenda as the number one thing for every human being on the planet, including every American, every Canadian, is the removal of Obama. And so we're making that very clear, that these forces are going to have to move now. They cannot play around. They cannot wait for a better opportunity. Or they cannot wait for Obama to become more unpopular. They cannot wait. They have to move now. So that's where we are. And I'm going to open it up for questions. And feel free to, ask questions. Okay. And then after that, I'm going to turn this over to Scott, who's going to discuss the Austrian school.
Has any of the 28 pages yet been released, or?
No, they have not been released, but it is the lack of their release which is providing a cover for the Saudis. But once they're released, we're expecting all hell to break loose. Because it was, go ahead.
I had been led to believe that there were some officials, senators perhaps, who had read an unredacted version?
Yes. Walter Jones asked permission to read it. He got to read it, and then he got this guy Stephen Lynch in Massachusetts to read it, and then the two of them put forward a resolution in the Congress to have it revealed. And Walter Jones has called upon every member of Congress to demand personal access to, but they can't talk about what's in it. They can, and so forth. And then Bob Graham was on Fox. He was on Huffington TV. He was the senator who was in charge of the commission, and he laid out a lot about it. But it hasn't been released. And the there is a problem with the population in that they are fearful, personally fearful. And releasing the 28 pages and breaking that down will also help to remove some of the fear that people have. Because, you know, if we could kill the president of the United States and cover it up and keep up a cover-up, then who are you to do anything about it? If we can protect the people who bombed, who attacked 9/11, then who are you to say anything, right? Because if we can get away with that, then who are you? We control you. We control the society. We control the way it works. You see, it's implicit terror, you know. And so people don't want to deal with that. They don't want to deal with that reality. But they also the better ones say, well, okay, if it's that bad, what can I do? Who am I? And so you have to have some kind of emergence of some kind of leadership that breaks this thing open. And then you will have people supporting you openly, because you broke the control when you got the pages released, or when you removed Obama. Same thing. If you remove Obama, you break the control. Oh, there's people who acted to remove Obama. There's forces that acted to remove Obama. You know, it's that kind of process. In other words, we're trying to create a situation where we crack this sense of littleness, this sense of virtually. And when you're that paralyzed, how can you talk to these people about your plans for NWAPA, your plans for North American Water Power Alliance, your plans for Glass-Steagall? Because it's all not real to them. Why is it not real to them? Because they know instinctively that they're not in charge, right? These are the better people, not the Greens. So the Greens are still a minority, but these are the better people, right? They know they're not in charge. They know that there's nobody representing them. So you have to crack that. And removing Obama is key to cracking that. 28 pages would also be a key to removing Obama and cracking that. And so this is what we have to do. And our being in the streets in the U.S. is very important, because we're in the public. We're in the public. They can see us. And today, I went out Thursday in the street to an area where we've actually had a lot of organizing in. And I had a person after person after person come up to me saying, I already contributed. I already get your stuff. But you're not, it's not happening. It's not happening. All these people were coming up to me saying, it's not happening. It's not happening. It's not happening. As if somehow we were the only one, we were going to make it happen, right? And yeah, of course we're going to make it happen. But it was peculiar for me, because I hadn't been out for a while, and all these people were coming up and saying, yeah, you know, I get your emails, I go to your website and stuff like this. I'm talking, you know, a lot of people at this post office in Monroe, Washington. So they were saying, but nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. It's not happening. Well, when something does happen, it'll be potentially like a Pearl Harbor, and that's what, you know, we're looking at. Go ahead.
There's a correlation between Prometheus and something that I've read of LaRouche's about the evolution of human species when we learned to cook meat. Is there a correlation there?
What LaRouche is saying is that the ability to control fire is probably, if any particular activity is probably a key point of distinction between man and whatever existed prior to man. It's that. But it's not definitive. I don't think that's definitive. But he's saying that the use of fire is like a leap from here to here. And it's also demonstrable in terms of the actual consequences. And the leap towards the control of fire also represents the transition from being animals to being human. And so the Promethean myth, right, of giving fire to man is the transition between being an animal and being a human. In that sense, yes. And both in a metaphorical sense, but also probably in an archaeological sense as well.
What about and from a practical sense too, none of the advancement would have happened except for that event.
Right, because fire, the control of fire, goes way beyond cooking food, of course.
Light, warmth,
everything. And so what LaRouche is emphasizing is the handbook of chemistry, where you look at the increasing control over the chemical elements and their use, and then going into the electromagnetic aspect and their use, and going into the atomic aspect and their use. That this is the history of the progression of man's development and power. You know, and this is, he's talking about the handbook of chemistry as a kind of evolutionary, from an evolutionary standpoint. Go ahead.
What about the transition of a so-called god of Olympus into, which is anti-human in its nature, to someone who was a god, is now a human, and he's Prometheus? That's a big transition, because is there among the gods that I don't really recognize or know any of them, do they have any free will amongst themselves? So if they don't, then Prometheus is a break from an anti-free will personality.
All right.
And I don't want to get philosophical. I just thought
you raised a very profound question. Okay, and LaRouche is saying something that I'm having trouble with. Okay, that I'm having trouble with, and I'll share it with you. But I'm having trouble with it on a certain level. He's saying that the Zeus-like oligarchy and those who worship the Zeus-like oligarchy, or who identify with the Zeus-like oligarchy, whether they are a Zeus-like oligarchy or not, have become a different species from human beings who love humanity and want development. And he's saying that the hardcore greens, that is the hardcore greens, have a different species characteristic than the kind of human being who wants progress, wants to raise a family, wants to provide a future for the family, wants that whole orientation. There's a difference in it, and when that change occurs, there's also a difference in the mental chemistry and in the actual functions of the mind and how the mind works in that person. And it actually shows up as a species distinction. And the same with peasants. A peasant, like you go to India, and you have a whole section of the population, they're just barely awake, you know. And those people, they have to make that transition somewhere. They have to make that transition to a different species almost. And so he's I'm having trouble with it because it's not a defined thing. It's not a very defined thing.
I know what you're
But
saying.
I know what you. But go ahead.
I just want to say it's a very dangerous step, though, right?
Yeah.
When you dehumanize other human beings.
Right. Right.
I mean, I can understand where you say, well, we had to, like, you know, self-defense. He was coming at me, I had to.
Right.
But that's
It's
already
a different thing.
different.
I'm talking about a kind of mentality, which once it becomes dominant in a person, it actually redirects their whole orientation. And the question is, how do you you know, you're dealing with a different. He's talking about a different species of mind, in a sense,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah,
has
it
a
is.
biological effect.
That's
But also, though, since the oligarchs' control has been intergenerational
Right.
for so long a period, they can have now become quite accustomed to having these monstrous intentions and feel nothing about them. Where most would be abhorrent at the thought of, you're going to destroy 90% of the world's population? You're going to do this?
Right.
You're going to do that? Are you crazy?
Right.
And I think that's what Lynn's maybe getting at, that the human personality, the whole, you change into a different being, a different species.
A different. Yeah. There's that. You got to be careful, though. You got to be very careful
yeah.
with that. Yeah.
No, no.
Yeah. You got. But no. That's. You're in a different mindset, and you try to talk to somebody like that, and it's not like you can have an argument. It's a very different.
No,
it's a different
Like,
mindset.
I noticed when Obama, Bush, Harper, whenever they're anywhere near the Queen, they're in a, or you know, they're just falling all over. They fall over themselves.
on the same topic. It's what James Fenimore Cooper covered in his The Headsman.
Mm-hmm.
The headsman is an executioner for the Swiss oligarchy, and he doesn't. And they're living in a mindset of the hereditary principle, where the son does what the father does, and so on and so on. It's a hereditary principle thing, and the head executioner doesn't want his son to be what he is. So there's an example of a change that takes place in someone's mind.
Yeah.
That they
Back
don't
to a more
want,
human.
He doesn't want his son to be dehumanized because he's had enough already.
Okay.
That's Cooper.
Some incident comes to mind from when we were in the street years back in front of the store downtown.
Right.
And a fellow came up. I think we were promoting the land bridge development, and a fellow came up and talked about money. And one of his comments was, "You have nothing. We have control of the money. You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have the 25 cents to come to this place unless we give it to you. It comes from us." He was speaking with total sincerity, as he was the God. I was flabbergasted that somebody could be that stupid and arrogant, but he believed it. So it's a cultural development, ingrown cultural development. It's almost a cultural disease.
I imagined in my mind how you would take down the caste system in India. Okay. And I also imagine in my mind how Martin Luther King Jr. went after the system of control that existed in the South of the United States, and you had to do something to get the black population to assert their minds. Okay. Now in India, it is my understanding that the lower castes are there because of the reincarnation principle, which determines their position, and that their mission is to be the lower caste and to be a good loyal member of the loyal caste in order to be moved up the ladder later, maybe.
Yeah.
Now, what happens when an individual of the lower caste decides that that is all crap and decides to assert themselves? They get challenged at every point. No, you don't know your position. 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 Right. So, so how do you change it? Well, one idea was you attack the very idea of reincarnation, which blows everybody up, blows the whole system up, because the whole system is based on reincarnation. So you attack the fundamental idea on which it is governed.
Yeah.
And of course, if you did that, you'd get into a lot of trouble. But anyhow, so this is what we're pretty much doing. Okay. All right.
Okay.
The year 2014, here in Vancouver, and we are going to have an incredibly turbulent, tumultuous year for the human species, for the United States, and for the world. The most important thing I can say to you right now is that we are on the eve of World War. And that World War, should it occur, is going to be nuclear. And should that nuclear war occur, the most likely outcome is the elimination of the human species from this, from planet Earth. There are articles in Europe comparing the current situation to World War I. World War I got underway. The drift towards World War I got underway in 1890 through impeachment, either through the invocation of the 25th Amendment or through resignation based on scandal or whatever. That's how serious the situation is. Obama has to be removed. Above all else, Obama has to be removed. It is estimated that 60% of the U.S. population would like to see him go. And now this has to be done. And that's the message that the movement of of Lyndon LaRouche and those associated with Lyndon LaRouche, both in North America and internationally, are now communicating to all of the forces of the world. Obama has to be removed as soon now. You can't let it wait. You can't let it fester, because you are headed towards a world war, a nuclear world war. When Bismarck was fired by the grandson of Queen Victoria, the Kaiser, and a war eventually broke out between one grandson of Queen Victoria, the Tsar, and the other grandson of Queen Victoria, the Kaiser. So, and we've been in war ever since. World War I, World War II, the Cold War, and this war of terrorism, and it's been ongoing ever since. And we've come to a point where we're looking at any moment, the United States, under Obama, launching a nuclear assault on Russia and China at any point. And this situation requires that Obama be removed from office. Either now, so let me go into that aspect of it. Why are we headed to a nuclear world war? I went through this in detail in the last meeting. Essentially, you have the revival of a commitment to progress and development in Asia, including Russia and now Ukraine. This is a revival of something called the American system. This is not communism, this is not capitalism, this is national economy. And a concert of nations who are coming into a full intention for development as the only way that they can go. You have, on the other hand, the Anglo-Dutch imperial system, which is not just about being in control. It's actually about population extermination. It's about wars, and it's about wiping out most of the human species. And the less direct means to do this are not there at this point. And nuclear war is their last potential to do this. Now, this is a very hard thing for people to even grasp, that we have an oligarchy running an empire which has had this intention of killing off most of the world's population. This is, you can imagine some deranged creature, going out and shooting, some deranged person going out and shooting 20 people in a mall. But can you imagine that the elite of the world want to eliminate most of the people, the vast majority of the people on the planet? This is the hardest thing for people to understand.